On Perspective this week, MHKs John Wannenburg and Tim Johnston talk about their first year in politics, the challenges they have faced in fulfilling their roles and their successes so far. They also consider the enormous financial pressures facing us all and give an honest assessment of whether government's actions are sufficiently strong to address the crises we're facing. I began by asking Tim Johnston how he sees his first year as an MHK.
A privilege still. I think, started banging on doors in early June, like you said, getting out and about, really enjoyed that whole process, talking to people, listening to the issues. And yeah, it's been a challenging but fascinating 12 months, Phil. And as you know, it's been a challenging and fascinating world. Of course, it always is, but I think at the moment, even more so, quite extraordinary, really. So yeah, quite an extraordinary 12 months in many ways.
Some people have suggested the first 12 months is an opportunity for MHKs to maybe just get their feet under the table, learn the ropes and this and that. But actually, this first year has been filled with major and significant issues. Have you actually got the time to sort of have that luxury of learning the ropes and discovering how everything works, or do you have to really learn very fast on your feet?
I think that's right. What you said, actually, we've had to hit the ground running. We first got elected. I think this time was the first time there was sort of a 2-week sort of induction process to sort of help us give us some guidance. But really, once that's out of the way, it's right. Well, there you are. Off you go. And as the majority of us are independent MHKs, there isn't the sort of a support network behind that. You just got to get on and get on with it. Absolutely. And yeah, we've hit straight away some big decisions, like you say, right at the start. And and I suppose, like I say, there always will be big issues, things, no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. That's always going to be the case. I suppose that's reality. But yeah, I don't think anyone was maybe expected some of the scale, and and I think it's important that through all that's going on at the moment, we do stop and look up and look out and realise that there's some big issues going on in the world, and we live in a very safe, relatively wealthy place, and actually we've got some big issues, but actually we need to look further afield and see what's going on.
And John, I mean, you, I think of all the new MHKs, the newly elected first timers, seemed the most shocked, from what I could see, to have actually been elected. How has that first year been for you?
In short, it's been an absolute baptism of fire. And you're right, it was a very pleasant surprise to be elected. I stood on the back of the last big thing which happened on the Isle of Man, which was the COVID, and the ravage that it made on my own personal business, which is why I was standing. I stood to make a point, and pleasantly I got in. But for me, it was a pleasure to knock on all the doors around Tremode, Williston and Governor's Hill, because I'd lived in the area for 20 years. And to be honest, I didn't know how other people live. So the fact that they've trusted me with their vote, I will do my absolute best to represent them as they would wish. And yes, there has been some big issues going on, and there hasn't been much time for us to find our feet, so to speak. Coming from a self-employed background where I make a decision today and I enact it today, I find it very frustrating that sometimes A, we've got to learn how to do things, and B, once you've learned, it takes time, and that is frustrating. And I guess that the checks and the measures are there for a reason, but I like to get things done, and things don't happen as quickly as I would like, and possibly as they should.
And in your private business, you will have had dealings with government. Is it different from the other side? I mean, is it what you expected?
I didn't have too many dealings with government, and I was very pleased about that. And is it different? Yeah, it is. It is. I suppose from an outsider, I thought once you're an MHK, you're in power, you're in government. But lo and behold, no, you are a backbencher, and you're not incumbent. And if you want to get anything done, you will have to do it through your colleagues. And I'm very good I think I'm good at forming relationships and trying to put the direction where we need to go in place. But you will get nothing done by yourself. You will only get it done by consensus.
And I think you picked on a quite an important point there, which is demonstrating you certainly seem to have learned some important lessons. A substantial amount of the power or the ability to do things lies in the hands of council ministers, perhaps more so than most people realise. Would you think that's
Oh, there's not a shadow of a doubt about that. In fact, I remember sitting in one of the interviews during the campaign, and the SAVE initiative, the failed SAVE initiative, was brought up, and both the other candidates who had been both MHKs were saying that it was regrettable that they had not been able to do it, and I tore the strip out of them because I said, well, you're there. Why has it been done? And lo and behold, I'm finding out why things don't get done.
And Tim, I mean, presumably you're finding similar frustrations. I mean, you did, through the Manx National Farmers Union, have quite a lot of dealings with government, so you would have had a fair understanding of how government works. But was it a surprise to you when you got in at how things work?
Yes and no. I think you're right. I mean, having that past history, dealing with DEFA, but I think understanding of how business works as well is sometimes you can't hit things on head on. You have to sort of tack, and you have to there's compromise, and I think that's always going to be the case. And I think we have to understand that as in politics is, again, when you've got 24 individuals coming together, whether it's Comin or whether it's the collective, there's always going to have to be compromise to get things done. But yeah, certainly frustration and I think also, and I think, to be fair, from the government, a recognition that there needs to be change. And we've seen some big change. We've seen personnel change. We've seen some big issues, some real concerns about the way government has functioned. I'm as critical as anybody about that. But the question then is, what are they going to do about it? And that's what we need to see, is how and that's the key to me. We can talk about it and we can complain, but ultimately what we need to see is improvement and proof of that. Government's had 12 months now to talk about the Island Plan, to talk about its ideas for the future. We've had the economic strategy, and I think it's right they've had that length of time. And I'm pleased that the strategy breaks that, what I call that political cycle, the idea that we've got to get everything done in the next couple of years, and that's it, because you're never going to get anything done in that. I'm pleased with that we've got that longer term plan, that longer term structure, because that's what we're going to need. So I'm happy that the fact that government has spent this time assessing, looking, but it needs to start doing. And I think most backbenchers, because we're involved in the Island Plan, have given the government a certain amount of leeway to say, okay, you're identifying the issues, and the economic strategy is identifying those issues, but actually now we need to start doing something about it. And
is that the relationship between backbench MHKs and the Council of Ministers? How is that working? Is that a good partnership, would you say, or a wary one?
I think it should always be wary. I think I think it's absolutely right that government should always be looking to be accountable, and the backbenchers should be there asking those questions. Not asking. I'm not one for asking questions for the sake of asking questions. Some do more than that. That's up to them. But ultimately, I'm happy to support the vision, the plan of what we're trying to do. But ultimately, they've got to get on with and do it.
And John, I mean, do you think people understand the difference between or the role of an MHK? I mean, many people listening to this programme, I'm sure, would say, oh, it's great to hear MHKs holding the executive to account by asking loads and loads of questions. Do you think that is a successful way of prosecuting your role as an MHK, or is there an other side to it?
Well, I'm not sure that people do appreciate just how difficult it is, because I'm finding it that way. But as part of the EPRC, I'm on the EPRC, which is Economic Policy Review Committee, along with two others, Claire Christian and Jason Morehouse. And I find that scrutiny body very valuable in holding government to account. So we've interviewed quite a few of the agencies, including the Chief Minister, and we asked them some tricky questions, which possibly I wouldn't be very comfortable doing that on a one-to-one basis. But under that umbrella, I do feel that I have the mandate to ask them whatever I want to. And I have done that, and we look forward to putting out some recommendations. I'll give you an example. Recently, this week, in fact, the EPRC met, which is unusual because it's the recess. And we put together a list of initiatives which we thought government should at least be considering in the current cost of living crisis. And then we had the workshop, which we brought them up again. And then we've done a press release, which should be out today, saying this is what the EPRC think. And I think under that umbrella, I think backbenchers have more of a voice. It's not to say that I won't stand up in the Keys and ask a few difficult questions. And I have done exactly that. I think I'm quite good at that, in fact. I don't always get a straightforward answer. Sometimes it's an officer has told me, and therefore this is the case. But really, that is not the case. And an officer may have given you either misleading or wrong information. And that needs to be exposed.
And it is certainly the case that certain people asking questions, ministers will be thinking, oh, well, here's a gift, a free opportunity for me to promote my department. Is that something that is starting to develop in Tynwald, would you say?
Some are better at it than others, and I mean asking questions. For myself, I'd like a direct question, and I don't want the fluff that goes around it. I want the direct answer. And if I don't get it, I'll keep asking it. I also don't believe in voting for something because it's always been that way or because we're expected to do it. I was one of, I think, 2 or 3 candidates which voted not to progress with the Manx gas price increase of 27.5% last October. I think the way that company has treated its customers is absolutely shocking. And for one, I wouldn't mind seeing that company collapse. But of course, we've got to go along with the consensus yet again. So they got the 27.5%. And the follow-up to that was another vote. But that was not a vote against Manx gas. That was a vote for Cura and to become more established. And I was happy to do that, even though that meant a further increase in price. It's difficult to do sometimes. I will always do what I think is the right thing to do. And I thought the right thing to do was to vote against the £32.6 million extra money the DOI wanted for the ferry terminal. They got it, but I've yet to see any accountability whatsoever. I've yet to see anyone take the fall for that. And marching people out of their jobs into a full pension is not being accountable.
Tim, you're obviously in the same position as John there. You've maybe reached different conclusions. Would you agree, though, that often Council of Minister papers are developed in such a way that it almost leaves you with no option but to support it?
I don't think that necessarily is the case, no. I think I would respectfully disagree with John on some of those points there, because I think, as I said earlier, most decisions there's a balance and there's a compromise, and for me, from my background, and I'm always looking at the bigger picture and putting things in context. And I probably just as frustrated as John about what's happened and the Liverpool landing stage, which it's just a ridiculous situation.
I accept that. Yeah, exactly.
But there again, I have to say then, we are where we are. And when you're looking at that decision and you say, well, what's the option? What is the alternative? The main alternative is, well, you stop doing it. But that would still be £45 million being spent with nothing to show for it. And to me, that is not an acceptable result.
Yeah, but the trade-off for that was that they wanted more money, pretty much the same kind of money that they've already spent, with no cap on it. And just to let them run ragged to me is not acceptable and not responsible.
No, I don't. I think you're right. There's one of those situations where we get parachuted into an existing problem that a new house have to deal with, and I think we all felt very uncomfortable about it. Yeah. And I think hope to draw a line and say this can't happen again. And I think, again, that's also putting pressure on the new government to bring the processes into place to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I think the public expect that, because the public are very, very fed up with this sort of thing happening.
As well, of hearing us say lessons have been learned, it won't happen again. Yeah. Here we go again. And yet it happens again. And, I'm really getting sick of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I don't disagree. But again, we need to see those mechanisms being put in place.
Now, I was interested in an answer that you gave there, John, in relation to Manx Gas. You wouldn't mind if the company went bust. I wonder whether we could just sort of unpick that a little bit, or actually go into that in some depth. Perhaps you could explain why you wouldn't mind if Manx Gas went bust.
I think the way they have treated and communicated to their customers has been unacceptable. I won't go into the rebate saga, but what they seem to say on one hand and do on another hand are not always necessarily the same. Prior to Cura being involved, I think they could have introduced their increases in a more stepped or graduated way. But there seems to be a lack of empathy for their customers. It's take it or leave it. And I'll rewind that a little bit. I don't know whoever put it in place where government effectively buys gas, who sells it to Manx Gas, who then sell it on to our constituents for a higher price, needs shooting. I mean, where did that ever make sense? I don't know. And so, if Manx Gas are going to take their coveted position and treat their customers as badly as they have, then no. In my world, that doesn't work.
And what then would happen? I mean, Tim, you obviously reached a different conclusion. You obviously didn't think it was a good idea for Manx Gas to go bust.
No, I didn't, and especially in the teeth of an energy crisis, because we have to think then again about what's the knock-on effects of that. What the disruption, the uncertainty, the cost involved in that process is incredibly damaging. So while I don't have any great love for Manx Gas, now is not the time to be doing something like that. Is there a day of reckoning? Is there a day to come when we need to ask some serious questions? Then yes, absolutely. But of course, the other side of the coin is a huge amount of people say government can't run a tap, and at the same time, we're then talking about government then running a gas company. So,
why is it okay on this island that we run an entertainment complex and a wildlife park and our steam packet, but when it comes to a core utility, that's not okay to run? No, I don't understand the thinking behind that.
I think for me the important thing is the regulatory framework that's now put in place to make sure that it's controlled. There's a profit margin there, and what we have to make sure is that business or whoever's running the network is putting safety first and putting the investment in to make sure that we've got a functioning system. Now, who runs that in the future, how that works is another matter. And again, we have got the regulation in place now. I think this is very important. But again, there's so many uncertainties. It's such a difficult time. Don't underestimate the knock-on effect and the cost involved and disruption of making that decision, because that's a huge cost as well.
We'll carry on with the Manx Gas theme for a little longer. The heating of homes, anyway. We've known for at least 10, probably 20, maybe even 30 years that the homes on the Isle of Man generally are not particularly well insulated, therefore leaking substantial amounts of energy. A lot of heat goes out of windows, through cracks in walls and doors and up chimneys and all the rest of it. Surely to goodness, government should be engaged in a much more aggressive way in actually getting out and helping people to get their homes insulated. You've got a year, you're a year in. It doesn't require a 12-month consultation to work out that all the homes that are over a certain age are really badly insulated on the whole, and we don't have schemes to actually significantly improve that situation. Why are there not more calls for significant change on things like that?
I think there are, and I think historically when gas prices were running at 50p a therm and life was good. To be fair, no one was really asking those questions, and I think now they are, quite rightly. And again, it's how do we respond to that? I mean, in the short term, we've seen the development of the sort of Green Living Grant, and within that there's the support towards insulation, and I certainly think, looking ahead to some of the challenges we've got and some of the discussions that are going on, I would hope to see some acceleration of that, because again, you're quite right. This is the sort of low hanging fruit that needs addressing. So again, has the issue always been there? Yes, but because economically people weren't really looking at it, it was one of those things that now it's now come to the fore.
And John, then, is this not part of the fundamental weakness of the whole system of government that we have? That government zips from one big issue to another. It's the issue of the day that government focuses on.
Yeah.
Whereas something like a basic thing like insulation, which would generate a lot of new business on the island if we got a really good scheme together to encourage more people to insulate their homes. It then insulates people from the sorts of price hikes that we've been looking at. This is the sort of thing that governments should be looking at strategically at the times when it isn't a big issue, to ensure that further down the line we don't have these sorts of crises.
Yeah. And to put it basically, it's you make hay while the sun shines. We haven't done that. We and going back to our earlier conversation, the pace of change is too slow. And you're right again when you say it's the project which gets focused on today and not tomorrow. I mean, I relate that the active travel strategy, which is ended in April 2021. I don't know how much money was spent on cycle lanes and everything else that goes with it, but that whole accent has been taken away, and I think it's got to be renewed. Not good enough. If we're going to do something, we need to do it from A to Z. And again, I've asked a few questions on putting the bridges up along the old trail, railway trail, because we've done all the widening, we've done the two cycle parks, if you like, on either end from Peel to Douglas, and I think the last mile is putting the bridges in there. Get people off the roads, particularly dangerous crossings. But that seems to have been stopped as well. I can't explain why. We need to be focused on finishing what we start. And
I think you're right. I think it's short-sightedness.
Yeah.
And again, it's the way government package things. So you look at active travel. It was meant to be about that 2.5 mile radius from Douglas. That was what it was all about. But of course, you then start applying it further and further afield, and people say, well, it doesn't work. Well, you need to reconfigure it then, because actually, and I agree with John, these bridges, if we put those bridges back in place, we would have the second longest cycle tracks in the United Kingdom. Well, isn't that a major visitor attraction?
And it's not just for cyclists, it's for horse riders, for walkers.
Yeah.
It will help with the NHS waiting lists, people will be out, losing weight, mental health and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to then talking about this short-termism. And I said earlier about the political cycle, that very, very narrow window. Phil, I don't think you know about that. You talk about that first 12 months, and then you've got a couple of years, and then all of a sudden everyone's thinking about the next election again. And that's you cannot make long-term strategy and plans in that environment. I mean, that's why, in principle, I support this longer strategy, because you've got to start thinking about these things in a much longer-term way, building these ideas in. Then you got a much better chance of them being implemented and properly, and that's what we need to do. We've got to break that cycle.
You're listening to MHKs John Wannenburg and Tim Johnston. Is part of the problem here that we don't have an effective system of government? I mean, we've got a really good system for delivering government policies, which is the Council of Ministers. Various reviews have been undertaken at different times, the last one being the Lord Lisvane review. That was largely parked on a very high shelf where it has gathered dust. Is not part of the problem here that the system isn't working as well as it should, the whole way in which we do government on the Isle of Man?
I'll give you an example of that, right? Last year, Poverty Committee, as before we came into office, the Poverty Committee met, and one of the recommendations they put together was that all those people on benefits should have free bus travel. And now that's been parked next to the Lord Lisvane report on the high shelf. Why has that not been done? I mean, we put together a committee, we put together recommendations, and nothing happens. And I want to know why things don't happen.
And possibly the answer lies within your hands. I mean, back in 1990s, when the Council of Ministers became a thing, your ministerial government was introduced, I don't think at any point did they think that they had developed the perfect system. They must have assumed that there would have been further tweaks and changes along the road in terms of how government particularly interacts with Parliament, and it's largely been left for 3 decades now, pretty much as was. I was told as a relatively new MHK myself, quite a few years ago now, that the time to act is when you are not wholly familiar and comfortable with the system. So actually, you guys, as the new MHKs, are the ones that really need to effect the fairly radical change, because if you wait another 3, 4, 5 years, potentially you'll have become used to the system and become comfortable with it. Is there any appetite, do you think, from amongst backbenchers to seriously address some of the flaws in the system?
I think the danger is, and of course, we talk about the world at the moment and the challenges. We have to work. What the electorate wants us to be doing. There's a danger that there's a criticism that we end up looking inwards and we spend huge amounts of time and energy tinkering with how our system works, while the major issues of the day aren't getting addressed. And we said at the start of the interview, we've come into a sort of a fairly unprecedented time for the island, in the world at the moment. So there's so many big challenges to face that there isn't a lot of room for that. That's the honest sort of situation we're in at the moment.
And yet, I mean, let's use an analogy. I love these things. Imagine you're in a car chase, and gradually the car that you're chasing is getting further and further ahead. At some point, you've got to recognise that maybe there's something the matter with the engine or the wheels or whatever, and you need to stop the car and actually do a radical overhaul so that you can potentially catch the car you're chasing up at some point in the future. And perhaps, I mean, maybe I've misread this, misinterpreted things, but perhaps part of the reason why some of the disconnects, certainly that John, you were talking about earlier, in terms of parliamentary scrutiny committees are finding things, making recommendations, which government can then completely ignore. Maybe some changes are required. Certainly the Chief Minister has recognised in relation to government, I mean, he talks about the lazy systems of government that need to be changed so that more can be delivered. But actually, what's the point of having the other 22 members, or no, 23 members of Tynwald who aren't in Council of Ministers, if Council of Ministers are making all the decisions and not following up on the recommendations of parliamentary committees?
I'm not sure that we need fundamental change. What I would say is that we need to be a lot more clear communicating, and we need to be far more honest in communicating. And again, this whole ridiculous saga with Dr. Ranson is a point that I can say to you that I'm deeply uncomfortable with it, having to be silenced by what's been going on. And I'm sure I speak for most of the other backbenchers. I'm not sure how we can change something like that. So whether government needs to change or whether the way we communicate our processes, that needs to change. And I think if we are more honest and open and transparent, that's the word, with our electorate, they would forgive almost anything else, providing we do exactly that. And I don't see that happening. I'm frustrated by that, and I've got a lot to say on the Ranson case, and it will be said, and I know others will say it as well. The fact that we have to not rely on whistleblowers, but the fact that what whistleblowers are the trigger for things changing means that the process is not fit for purpose. and it's probably very hard to change it, because people do become conditioned and feel, I'm not one of those people. I will never accept the status quo because it's always been that way. That's not my way. So no, I am uncomfortable the way it is, but I think we don't need deep change, but we need more honest accountability.
And of course, there is also a fear amongst people, many people on the island, that raising your head above the parapet and criticising government means that the chances of succeeding in the future, if you need any level of government support.
What is success?
Well, yeah. So there is that fear. I mean, I remember as a minister listening to people and thinking, oh, don't be silly. Of course, the Isle of Man, it's it's transparent. Anyone can do and say anything they want. But the Manx public are a little bit loath to get too critical of government because they rely on government for so many things. Tim, I mean, is that a fair assessment, do you think, or do you have a different view?
No, I mean, I was just, I think John's brought up the importance of scrutiny a couple of times, and I think the other side of that is that these processes are going on all the time, but it's never talked about. Publicly, it's never raised. There's been some over the years. You have to look back, and there's been some very powerful things happen within scrutiny committees, people have come forward in very difficult situations, and there has been some big decisions made and big changes made, but we don't really talk about that very much. I think we can be better than that. And I remember recently having a discussion. I think we're talking about about the difference between government and Parliament, and actually, I think there's definitely a need for Parliament to talk more about what it does and the importance of it, like I say, separate from government, which I think it's really, really important, the work that goes on. So definitely work to do there. And I certainly like to see Tynwald and its processes talk to the public more about what we do and what happens. I mean, there's one or two cynical people out there talking when it comes to what MHKs get up to.
Just one or two.
One or two. But it's actually surprising, and they often don't understand actually the amount of work that does go on behind the scenes, and as John says, goes on within the scrutiny committees.
And that goes back to the communicating I was talking about earlier. There is an awful lot of it. You're right.
So then, I think that talking about what MHKs do, that's a neat way of moving us on to. Okay, you've been in 12 months. What has Tim Johnston, MHK, ever done for us?
Well, again, I think it's splitting it down, isn't it, into the different roles. I like to think that I have been, an active constituency MHK, getting out and about, holding surgeries, helping people with their issues. I'm very much involved with the scrutiny committee, the IPRC committee. Again,
and that's IPRC.
Yeah, environment and infrastructure. So that's looking at DEFRA and DOI. And again, plenty of issues there and plenty of work. And we've got an oral hearing coming up next month with them. So a lot of work going on there. And then I made a decision to go into a department, elected and gone into the department for enterprise. And political responsibility for the business agency.
No minister there yet. Is that? Are you all sort of slogging it out amongst yourselves to see who's going to succeed, or any hints yet that a minister?
There you go again. Why is ministership always the point of succession? Why? It's a fallacy that you succeed if you're a minister. You can succeed very well from the backbenches.
But what you, I think, and Tim have already identified is that the vast majority of decisions are taken by ministers. I think for too long, perhaps, this has not really been explored, and maybe it does need to be, but maybe not. But yeah, so no hints anyway as far as enterprise minister, chief minister is currently doing.
That's right.
Okay then, John. What's John Wannenburg actually achieved in the last 12 months?
Well, I like to think that first and foremost, the people who put me in there, I owe them a debt. So, anything I can do to help them with their issues, then you can count on me to do that. And I'll do do it to the best of my ability. And that doesn't mean I will give them a positive outcome. That means that I will try my best to give them a positive outcome. So I'm very satisfied that I've been effective in that role. I also went into the DHA and have delegated responsibilities for the fire service. And I'm chair of the OFT, which at times gets a bad press, and I think unfairly so. And it's a heavily under-resourced department, and they've got some really, really effective people in there. It's very hard for them against the current environment where petrol prices are going up and transportation's going up and fuel costs and energy costs, and it is all hands to the pump there. And then they've got their normal jobs anyway, and it is difficult.
And is the legislation fit for purpose? Because I know for a long time there's been talk of improving the legislation that governs the role of the office, I don't know, has that actually come to fruition yet?
The situation at the moment, it's still an independent statutory board. It is under the auspices of DEFRA. And then we have this situation where we're looking at forming a regulatory hub. So there's a lot of things up in the air at the moment. I mean, it's based in St. John's at the moment, where it used to be in Fort Street. That is challenging as well, because a lot of their situations where they are needed would need to be in Douglas. So I think we need to get clarification as to where we're going to go on with the hub. And sits at the RTLC at the moment and other areas to try and gain sort of health and safety and the synergy in government in that respect. But the OFD has a particular role to do, which doesn't affect anybody else. So,
but do you have enough power? I mean, it certainly sounds from your frustrations earlier in this discussion that maybe you feel limited in what you can do.
I think that would be true to say. For instance, just because one person has a problem saying that internet charges are too high doesn't make an investigation. So we will only react when there's enough people giving it critical mass to make it worthwhile an investigation. And there's been some challenges along with the taxis as well, the Village Connect system, things like that. I think we get an unfair press.
I mean, I think ultimately, like I say, this time last year we were on an election campaign, and there was very clear messaging from the electorate of the issues. I like to think that we are looking at those issues, whether it's Comyn or whether it's people questioning from the back benches. These are the issues. We all had input into the Island Plan.
Yeah, we did.
We all recognise a lot of the challenges, whether it's over skills, labour shortage, big housing. These are the big issues. Now, the question then is, is the government doing anything about it? And I would say, well, we've seen the creation of the housing board. We've seen consultations going out on employment legislation, on childcare legislation. The things that we need to get on with. Now, we can say this should have all been done years ago. Yeah, okay, but it wasn't. So here we are now,
yeah, most people will say, a year ago I told you what the problem was. A year in, I haven't really seen any significant change. Shouldn't you as backbenchers really be holding the ministers, holding them to account to a far greater extent than you currently are in relation to things that are big issues for people? People are genuinely thinking that they have to leave the island because they can't afford to live here. Is setting up a committee, setting up a new board, doing some scrutiny, is this enough?
No, it's not enough. Of course it's not enough. And you need to start seeing those results. But you've got to start. And you can't build houses in 12 months. It's a process, and we talk about the issues with planning need addressing. We also know there's a reluctance across the island to build on greenfield sites, so there's limitations there. But we also know, for example, that we've seen the creation of the Manx Development Corporation, identifying those sort of government-owned sites across Douglas at the moment. There's already been a start on developing the old nurses' home. So things are happening. Of course, frustration is things never happen quick enough. We know that. But all I can say is that I can see there's a process starting. Therefore, me standing up and saying there's a housing crisis as a backbencher now is a pointless exercises, everyone will say, we know that. So that's not I don't see the point of doing that. What I want to see is action, and I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see the fact that they've adjusted the first-time buyer schemes to try and bring them more up to date with where we are on pricing, house prices and incomes. It's only a starting point. A lot more to do. We've been told that there'll be more detail coming through in the autumn. So we want to see that. And we want to see it happening. So I think it's important to recognise that there are things happening, and it's only right that those things carry through, and we watch very carefully what is happening.
Is part of the problem that we have a disparate collection of views that are expressed to the public at election time? We've had 3 party members elected for 2 parties. The remaining 21 members of the House of Keys have no party affiliation. So then, effectively, that's why you need all this talking time and this considering time, because there's so many different views that you have to then reach consensus and agree ways forward. Is it not time that we actually considered, or the Isle of Man actually embraced party politics?
No, I don't think it is. And if you mention the 3 party members that are there at the moment, I've seen them vote against each other. So I'm not quite sure what the advantage would be all the time. And indeed, Phil, when you were in politics, were you in a party? No. So I have a mandate from people of Douglas North, and I will represent them and their interests as much as I can. But of course, I'm an island politician as well. And so I will do the very best along those lines. But I think party politics in the Isle of Man, I mean, we do have a party, of course, the Coman Party, which makes all the decisions. And it is our job to make sure they are held to account.
Does there need to be more funding, perhaps, in terms of the Clerk of Tynwald's office in relation to policy development? I mean, there's always been a bit of nervousness on the part of both Parliament and government for Tynwald, the Parliament, to actually be engaged too much in policy development. It's been primarily the remit of the government departments, this, hasn't it? Would it be? I mean, because if you look at UK politics and politics in most developed countries around the world, there are policy development units that actually do the research, come up with alternative views and alternative policies. Is that a role perhaps that the Clerk of Tynwald's office needs to do a bit more, Tim Johnston?
It's an interesting question, Phil.
Because the assumption is there's just one answer, and that's the one that Coman has provided. And because there's nobody else on the island that has as much resource to develop new policy, Coman tends to win on 95% of the occasions.
I think what I would say, it goes then right back to the start of this Parliament, where all members were very much invited to be involved in and thoughts and plans for the island plan in the future. And I think everybody inputted into that, had the opportunity of doing that. Again, I suppose I come back to my sort of business practical background. At some point, you have to make a decision and get things moving. I think there's a danger you end up with more and more layers. And again, I think going back to the party politics, I wouldn't agree with that either, because I think you end up then making compromise positions and considerations, maybe with a sort of party whip, and not getting on with having the view. I think having those independent views coming in, because what you hopefully are within the Keys is a reflection of the public and the various views and the opportunity to debate and bring those together. And as we said at the start, there will always be compromise. There will always have to be compromise to get things done. And so
5 minutes ago we were speaking about taking time in doing these things. I mean, you add another layer in with the Office of Tynwald, Clerk of Tynwald. That's another layer. Probably need more staff. It's more money, and it'll certainly take more time. So no, and they don't have a mandate. So no, I'm not in favour of that.
Okay, then we're coming towards the end of the programme. You've got 4 years left to make a big impact before the next election. You may or may not choose to stand at that stage. Going through your manifesto commitments, the key points that you were elected on, what would you say are your top priorities now, and have they changed over the course of the last year? And what's the one thing that you want to deliver now more than anything? So perhaps if we start, we'll start with you then, John.
What I want to see more equitable society. I want to see people be more generous to each other and a more compassionate society. And I want to see more open and honest government. That's what I want to see. What I personally want to achieve, like Tim mentioned 5 minutes ago, I think the most important thing for all of us is to get the housing situation up and running. It is without doubt the number one on the agenda. I want to see a better Nobles Hospital. I want to see people not waiting as long. And I want to see small businesses like I was, make the landscape be made easy for them to operate and thrive.
And how are you going to deliver these things?
Through consensus. And I don't have all those answers, Phil. But as we started at the top of the conversation, you'll get nothing done by yourself. It'll be through everybody else as well. And I don't believe any of those things I mentioned are unique to me. So we will get it done. It will take time. But the first thing we've got to do is get through this awful cost of living crisis. And it is government's number one fundamental duty, as in times of war and pandemic and cost of living crises, that we support the people. And the most vulnerable need to be supported, and not just them, it's people above them as well. And if we don't do that, nothing else matters.
Tim, I mean, would you say any of your priorities were misguided? You now know a lot more, and you're in a better position to consider things, or would you say you had it pretty much right in your manifesto?
Others will decide whether I had it right or not, Phil. I think I came into it. My instinct was very much about. I was very keen last year, hearing the fact that there was the KPMG were working on a strategy. Again, I do tend to come more from a business head, but that's, to me, is the most valuable thing, because we have to have a clear plan for the island, a clear long-term plan for the island, because without that, we'll all suffer. And so having a clear economic plan is really key. Understanding that we are, as an island, in competition with other jurisdictions across the world, and we have to be competitive. So we have to have wages that reflect our cost of living. We've got to get on top of our housing challenges. We've got to have world-class employment legislation, childcare legislation, all the things that we need to make sure that we are keeping our young people on the island, that we're attracting young people to the island. And looking at some of the issues of that plan that the strategy has raised, whether it's the fact we know we're falling behind on healthcare, education isn't where it should be. These are things we've got to get on top of. We know that middle and low owners are struggling, so we have to help there as much as we can. And that's short term with the big issues we've got at the moment. We have to help and support as much as we possibly can. But this problem, this crisis, is going to go on for a very long time, actually, sadly. I mean, we haven't reached the peak of inflation yet. We know there are real challenges ahead. So the government has got to have a sustainable plan. But while all that's going on, you don't ignore the bigger picture, because the plan is still absolutely key to that. So it's doubling down on it and making it work for everybody, and having a more balanced, fairer system.
I think what we've done, if you ask me, what have I done? I think, along with Tim and other backbenchers, we've put the direction of travel in place, I think, and I hope to make an effect, a more positive effect, on all the island's residents.
Well, gentlemen, I hate to say it, but we have run out of time. I enjoyed that. I hope you did.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm glad you did, Phil.
You didn't answer the direct question, though, did you? Refreshingly honest there from MHKs John Wannenburg and Tim Johnston. Are they right? Do you have confidence in their ability to lead us out of the crises we're facing, or do you shudder at the thought of 4 more years with our current MHKs? Please get in touch with Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and let me know your thoughts and views on the programme. And don't forget the podcast is available from Manx Radio's website. But for now, I'm Phil Gorn, Guramayo Sun Geishakrum. Thanks for listening.